question I'm going to ask today, and you'll hear this a couple of times, is how are you managing your cash? I asked a couple of friends to share their stories. They're a couple of older guys. These aren't the younger entrepreneurs, they're the older entrepreneurs. And I got one in there that's probably in his 40s, a third that'll come up later. But one is there's two. One is the entrepreneur and the other is the CFO. And I'm going to let the entrepreneur go first, okay? And it's Richard Brock. In 1976, for those of you who don't know, Richard pulled me out of a CPA firm after I was working there for about 8 months and launched me into my new career into the software industry. He was the first entrepreneur I ever met, and I still think he is the absolute real deal. I always compare people to him and his characteristics. And he changed the course of my life. And that is one of the characteristics of an entrepreneur. That's what they do. They change your life. But Richard is, for those of you who don't know Richard, because he was big here in Atlanta, now he's in Arizona, but he's a serial software entrepreneur. He was Entrepreneur of the Year. He had multiple exits. He started a company which went public. He continues to focus on marketing automation, where at one time he was one of the 10 most influential people in CRM. In fact, most people don't know this, but he coined the phrase Salesforce automation. His current company is Sales Talk Technologies. He offers an incredible AI solution which dramatically increases salespeople's call effectiveness. This is what I love about Richard. He is never down. He is never out. He's always optimistic, and he's actually sometimes practical. So Richard, if you'd unmute yourself, I want to thank you in advance for sharing with us. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. All right, perfect. I wanted to give you a big intro because you're my best friend, and you deserve this. A lot of people don't know all those things about you.
Well, thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for those kind words. They're very kind. Maybe I'll share one thing about being an entrepreneur that I learned in high school from a Latin teacher, of all odd things, okay? What he said was, quitters never win and winners never quit. So that maybe is a key entrepreneurial thing is don't give up. It ain't over till it's over. But basically, you had asked me to share some observations of some mistakes I've made and what I might have learned from them. And so I can maybe start with a mistake I made recently, what I learned from it, into an opportunity.
Well, yeah, I'll just frame it up a little bit. I was interested in, you to tell us a story about where you had sort of limited cash, but you're willing to bet in anticipation of something that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the story you're going to tell us a little bit about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, we were ahead of the market with the sales acceleration applied to sales engagement. Fortunately, the number one person in that space now has redefined that sales AI for sales relevance is more important than cadence. God bless him. But until then, everybody's focused on sales acceleration or just basically cadence. So we were ahead of the time. So I had a chance. I came in the top 10 in a state of Arizona, 250 companies plus applied for a $250,000 grant for innovation development. And getting in top 10, I knew I'd get it the next. Yeah, I knew I'd get no strings attached. It's just to grow business and employ people. So then the next year, I thought for sure I'd get there. Well, I retained some resources, some development resources, some other people on the team with the idea of being, if I get the grant, I'll need these people. And of course, having those people would help me get the grant. But if you don't get the grant, the money's gone. So by spending the money in anticipation of getting the grant, which wasn't sure, I got in the top 10 out of over 250. You'd think I'd get there, but thinking doesn't matter because the cash went out. In retrospect, what I learned was that the product was way ahead of what it was needed to be a competitive product. And so what I should have done is cut the development. But the pain was when because I didn't get the grant, I'd spent the $50,000 extra on development expenses I didn't need. That had to come out of marketing budgets, and that is a problem. Because it's a big problem because you have to get exposure, and early adopters are hard to find, so innovation's hard to pioneer. So that was a huge mistake to bet the ranch on that particular one. So basically, what I learned from that is you got to focus your resources on where you have the highest leverage potential to get a return. Not
Let
that you
me
don't
ask
have
you
a,
this. Let me ask you this, Richard. You know, when we were together, you know, at MCS, this is way back in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, you kind of bet the farm there. you you had everything. You were all in. It was your first deal. And, you know, I kind of watched you in that thing. You know, why did that work? You know, when you bet it all there, you know, back in the early 80s, you know, on like the IBM PC. Remember, we were kind of put it all in there. And why did that work and this last deal that you just talked about not work?
well, the last deal is working now. It's taken off really fast.
What was
So
the difference? No, in
the
those
difference, yeah,
two
the difference
bets, if
between
you
the two
will.
is,
Two bets.
yeah, I'm a CPA. And so long story, I developed some software for time and billing. And IBM said, why don't you sell that software to another CPA? And I, well, software's all profit, isn't it? So off I went. Now, the difference was when I went to CPA firms to sell the software, you know, you would be in Atlanta and I'd be traveling all the time. I walked in as a CPA. And the difference in my software, because I knew what the CPAs were trying to do, it was unique because it was telling CPAs you could get your clients to pay you more if you basically showed them increase the perceived value of your services. And that was the unique thing about our product because it gave much more detail than anything else. Now, when I went to a CPA firm, well, it was easy. I go in there with the credibility of being a CPA with a high perceived need to increase their billings and the customer retention. That was easy. So I had credibility in there. All right. And the product was obvious when you looked at it. Well, that is obvious out there. And then we also did a deal where we had a no risk guarantee.
Yeah, but I think that the difference here is you're between these two bets that we're talking about, just to kind of put it, is one, you were betting on getting a grant.
Oh, yeah.
Which means that it was actually in other people's hands, whether or not you're going to get that money or not. It's their decision. Whereas the second where you bet the farm when we were together, you were betting on you.
That's
right. It
was
you talking to a customer. And I think that that's a big difference in what actually happened here. Is sort of like there's a lot of entrepreneurs these days who are betting on on investors coming in and sort of saving the day.
That's a bad bet.
And in perspective.
Yeah, that's a huge observation, Charlie. You're right. So if you stick to your knitting, so to speak, there were 40,000 CPA firms. We sold 10,000 of them. So we had 25% market share, which was pretty huge.
Yeah.
We doubled every year.
So what would your advice be to end this? I want to get to Ralph here, but what would your advice be to entrepreneurs in these times of uncertainty with regard to their cash?
Spend it where you have obvious differentiation, such as you know the space well. Sell to the perceived need, and quit trying to innovate today. I mean, we innovate, and it's incredible what we're doing. But the most important thing is you got to get out in front of them. You got to sell to perceived need. You can't create a need. So do enough work out there in the field, walk around with the people, and whatever the perceived need is, like sell aspirin on New Year's Day. And if you're ahead of the curve, you're trying to sell aspirin on New Year's Eve.
That is a Richard Brock, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't. Everybody New Year's Eve, I don't need any aspirin. Don't need any aspirin. New Year's Day, it's easy to sell aspirin.
But it's interesting that I like what you're saying there is about, and you're a product guy. I always told you you're a product guy. Richard's amazing. He thinks about product. Is to say it's not about innovation. It's about selling to the perceived need, okay? It's not that one new feature. It's what do they need right now that they'll pay me for.
That's it.
This has been really helpful. Thanks.